and welcome to another Lawn Fawn video. Today we are taking a look at the new stamp set Den Sweet Den and the coordinating dies. This stamp set has a cute little bear family that's all snuggled up in their den with lots of activities to pass the time as they hibernate. There's books for them to read, knitting for them to do, and coffee to drink. This stamp set has coordinating dies and a little die that cuts out the hands of that little bear so it can hold all those items, which I'll show you in a little bit. And then there's also the new Stitched Dens dies, and this coordinates perfectly with this stamp set. So I'm going to show you how I use those in my first card today. So to start with, I've cut some panels here. I've cut a panel of Storm Cloud cardstock with the stitched wood grain backdrop. I've also cut a piece of narwhal and a piece of chocolate bar and a piece of sunflower cardstock, all with the stitched rectangle. That's the largest stitched rectangle. And then I'm going to use my dens here to cut an opening out of each of these panels. I'm going to start with the one that's going to be in the foreground and cut my largest opening. So this is the one with that stitched wood grain detail on it. Then I can layer this over top of the next one, which is going to be that narwhal cardstock. I'm going to take the stitched in that's the next size down. And you can see these are not exactly the same shape, so they have some natural discrepancies and look different from each other to give that more natural look to the dens. And then finally, I'm going to layer the sunflower behind it. And for this one, I'm going to take the smallest stitched in opening, and I'm going to kind of tuck it up towards the right corner. This is going to end up being a window to the outside world. So I'm just going to hold that in place with some tape and run that through my die cut machine. So you can see how those are going to stack together. And I'm just going to slide my card base right behind it just for a minute. And I'm actually going to trace where that opening is. And this is so I know where to put the pattern paper that I'm going to put in this opening. And actually I didn't need to do this because I did my pattern paper a little differently than I thought I would. But first I'm going to cut the floor of the den. So the yellow is like the walls. They have a nice sunflower yellow wallpaper. And then that chocolate bar cardstock is going to be the floor. So what I'm going to do is I've got this stitched hillside, and I've just placed it where I want it, holding it in place with a piece of tape. I slid those other openings off of it. I'm going to run it through my die cut machine. And then what I'm going to do is line up this die with the piece I cut on that chocolate bar cardstock so that I cut a piece that's exactly the same size. And then these two will sort of inlay together. Instead of layering them one on top of each other, they won't create as much bulk by doing this technique. So you can see that floor is just going to fit right into that curve that I cut out of the yellow piece. And then they'll all layer together just like this. So I'm going to use some pattern paper for the scene that's outside my little window that I cut there. I'm going to be using the light blue with the white dots from the Into the Woods remix set. And then I'm also going to use some spiffy speckles green for the ground. And what I actually decided to do instead of layering like a rectangle back there is to take that stitched in die that I cut the opening with and cut my two pieces of pattern paper. So now they're exactly the same size. And then I'm just going to cut the ground with a stitched hillside and layer that over top of my blue piece that I have there. So now all I have to do when I assemble this is drop it in the hole of the window. So I'm going to start to put together my den on my card base. I'm going to start with that sunflower piece and layer it right against the top edge of my card base here. And then I'm going to just drop this piece in that opening. And then finally I can layer on the floor of the den right below that yellow. So my whole first layer of my background is all complete. Now for the den pieces here, I'm going to sort of build this up. So I'm going to use some thin foam adhesive on each of these pieces so that you get that dimensional 3-dimension look. I'm using thin foam squares so that I don't add too much bulk since I'm adding 2 layers of this. And I'm just going to line that up and attach it to my card. Then I'm going to do the same thing with that dark gray cardstock. I've put a bunch of thin foam squares on this one as well. And so it's just going to give each of those layers a little more separation between them, which is also going to allow me to tuck some of my images behind them. So these are almost like walls in the den, kind of dividing up the rooms in the den. So this die set has a little die here, as you can see, that will cut the arms of this little bear so that he can hold things. So all you have to do is line it up with the arms of the bear like I've done there. And I'm just going to hold it in place with a little piece of tape, and then once you run it through your die cut machine, you can see how all you have to do is tuck these little items into his paws and he holds them perfectly. So this bear is going to be doing some knitting. So I'm just going to go ahead and glue those knitting needles with that little scarf that's been started into its hands. And just how cute is that? So I'm going to start to lay out my pieces and figure out my placement of all my little bears here. So I've got these two knitting and these two fell asleep, so they're not doing a whole lot of work in the den these days. And then my lamp, it's just sort of floating, but it's going to be hidden behind that bear a little bit, so you won't know that it's floating in the air like it looks right now. And I also thought it was kind of cute to hang that Den Sweet Den sign up like it's kind of hanging in an opening of the den. I just thought that was super sweet. So I've just popped up my bear on some foam. I'm going to tuck that lamp behind him. I'm going to pop up this bear that's knitting with some foam. I'm going to add its little coffee cup and the little steam. There's a die that will cut out the steam, and there's steam shaped like a heart, which is what I've used here, and there's also steam that's not shaped like a heart. I love this little sleeping guy, and then this other one, he looks like he's trying to help Mom knit the scarf here. So I'm adding that little ball of yarn as well. And then I'm going to add the Den Sweet Den sign. So to finish off my little window scene, I'm using a couple of the tiny little clouds from All the Clouds. I'm going to stamp them in some narwhal ink and cut them out with the coordinating dies. And I use those two tiniest little clouds there to just make it look even more like a sky through that window. Now I'm going to stamp out my sentiment, have a very cozy day, just on a sentiment banner. This is cut from some speckled eggshell cardstock, and I stamped it in narwhal ink to match the gray cardstocks that I used on this card. And then I'm just going to glue it right along the bottom there, just using a little bit of liquid glue. So I'm putting that glue right on the bottom of the banner because the top sort of overlaps to that next layer that's behind it, and that is not popped up like the front layer is. And then finally, I decided I wanted to add that little heart that's in the set that I've stamped on the lamp, but I also decided I wanted to add it to the coffee cup. I just felt like it just needed a little bit more that cream colored coffee cup there. And then this is my finished card, and I just love this card so much. It turned out better than it was in my head, and I just think it's so sweet. Next, I'm going to make a Christmas card, and I'm going to use some of the new Let It Shine paper. I love this cream color with the gold dot, and I'm also going to use some red glitter paper. So I'm going to cut the red glitter paper with the stitched rectangle frame. This is going to be hidden behind this paper with the gold foil, which I'm going to cut with the largest outside in stitch rectangle. But to save my glitter paper, I use the frame. So you're still going to get the look as if it was a solid piece, but you save that whole inner piece that got cut out and you can use it for another project. So there's just a little tip. I'm also going to cut a piece of craft cardstock with that same outside in stitch rectangle, so it's the same size as my cream colored pattern paper. And then I'm using some dough ink and my wood grain backdrop to stamp a wood floor for my little bears to sit on. I wasn't sure if I needed that whole height of it, so I'm going to go ahead and stamp it again so that I fill that whole piece. Turns out I would have been okay with what I had stamped, but I wasn't sure where my die was going to fall. So I'm going to line those up, and I'm using another stitched hillside there to create my floor. And I'm using the tree from Christmas Dreams to create my Christmas scene. So I was just setting those there to make sure that I kind of had my floor in the right placement and it was high up enough from the bottom, but not too high so that everything kind of got centered in the card. So once I have that cut, I'm going to go in with that same dough ink that I stamped with and my blending brush and just add a little bit of that ink to the sides to define it a little bit and make it stand out a little bit more. Now I'm going to go ahead and stamp my sentiment on the bottom right on this cardstock. And it's going to say Merry Christmas from our home to yours. So I'm just lining this up in my MISTI. And once I've got it sort of where I want it on that piece of cardstock, centered up and straight, then I'll just close the door of the MISTI and pick it up. So I'm going to pick that up and then I'm going to ink it up with black ink so I have a nice crisp black sentiment on this wood grain floor. And now I can start to assemble my card. So this is that glitter frame and I'm just going to glue that right onto the card base. Lining it up with the edges, making sure it's nice and straight. And then I'm going to add my wood floor to my piece of pattern paper before I add my pattern paper to my card base because I'm going to pop that up on some foam. So before I move on, I'm going to use that die again to cut the paws of this little bear so that he can hold some stuff. So I'm just lining that up again with the arms of the bear and I'm going to hold it in place with a little piece of tape. And now he can hug the little baby bear, which I just think is so adorable. And now I want hugging bears on every card I make ever because it's just so sweet. So I'm just adding a little bit of glue so that he's tacked down and those two are together. They're glued together forever. And now I'm going to pull off the liner paper from some foam tape that I put on the back of that pattern paper panel. I'm going to go ahead and line that up on my card base so you get that nice thin glittery border around it. So lots of sparkle and shine. I love the fancy gold wallpaper that I'm creating for these little bears in their home. I'm using the Christmas tree from Christmas Dreams and also the cookies and milk and the dear Santa from Christmas Dreams. And I'm just sort of going to lay out my pieces where I want them to be. So I've got my placement and then I can start gluing all these down to the card. So I'm just going to glue that Den Sweet Den picture frame hanging right in the center up on the wall. I'll glue down my tree to the background, and then for the little bears, I'm going to start popping them up on some foam squares. So again, I'm using two different thicknesses of foam squares. I went ahead and glued the little bear on top of this one. They've just fallen asleep in a pile. And I used thin squares on them, and then I'm going to use some thicker squares on the ones hugging. So they're going to sit on top in front of those ones that are sleeping. So we're just going to layer them over top of each other, creating my little scene. I'm going to add my little red coffee cup, and then I'll also add the cookies and the milk waiting for Santa. And then here is that finished card, and I think it might be one of my favorites as well. I just love those little bears, and I love their fancy pants foil wallpaper in the background. Now let's take a look at some examples from the design team. I love this super cozy card that Audrey created using those dark cardstocks. I like her use of the wood grain cardstock for the outside and also the wood grain pattern paper for the inside. It just looks like such a cozy, warm place to sleep. Grace created this super sweet scene using the stitched in as a window as well, and I just love that fall tree that she put outside and her use of patterned paper on some of the elements in this scene. Lynette created this super sweet scene, and I love how she used the stitched in to create a rug for these little bears to sleep on. It's just too cute. And then Elena created a super sweet scene. Those little bears are hibernated away for the winter under the mountains, and I just think it's so sweet. Elise created this cute scene, again using the stitched in as a window, and Christmas is happening in this den, and I love the decorations hanging between the different layers of the dens. Letitia's card is super sweet, and it is perfect for the bookworm in your life, and I just love that lamp sitting on top of those books. Yainea's card is super sweet. I love how she used the different colors and pattern paper to create the different layers of her den, and I love that pattern paper on the lampshade. Maureen created a really fun interactive light up card. You can see she stamped push here on the lamp and it lights up, which is just so cool. Elise created some fun, simple cards with those cute little bears just laying on these sentiment banners. These are some super sweet, simple cards that would be easy to recreate. And then Elena has a really cute slimline card, and she paired it with the thanks, thanks, thanks sentiments. And I just love all those books and that little bear family. Tammy created a super sweet Christmas scene. She used the brick stencil to create a brick house for these little bears to live in, and I love how she used the bears along with the Christmas dreams tree and fireplace. And then I love Kara's little scene, just that den that's its own little hill covered in leaves, and that tree with the sleeping squirrel behind is just so sweet. Megan has this really awesome shutter card with all these bears getting ready for Christmas, and I just love that cute little bear that pops out of the surprise shutter on the inside. I also love Grace's use of the stitched in to create this little window where they're looking out to their friends playing in the snow. Thanks so much for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.